Hey, how's it going guys? My name's Daniel, aka HashLips, and welcome back to my channel where today I will show you how you can build out an NFT gallery using the Icy.Tools GraphQL. For most people in the NFT space, you might be familiar with Icy.Tools, the analytics tool for NFT collections tracking real-time data. If you are not familiar with Icy.Tools, this is a great platform to track the real-time data on the NFT market. But what's even cooler is that QuickNode recently acquired Icy.Tools, and as a product, we get to use the Icy GraphQL NFT API. So in this video, we'll use the GraphQL API to build out our own gallery, showcasing the NFTs that's in our wallet or someone else's wallet. If you go to the link, this is what you will see. Web3 developers meet GraphQL. GraphQL, think of it as a query language for APIs. And it is very intuitive to use. This is not a GraphQL tutorial, but I'm simply going to show you how to consume the data. Now let's click on the Get Started button. Now we need to sign up or sign in. I'm going to sign in. The first thing that you'll do is create a project and then get to your dashboard looking like this. Here we get an interface where we can build out our GraphQL queries. Queries are simple instruction objects that we send to the backend to tell it how we want the data to be sent back to us. Now these queries can get quite complex, so therefore this documentation page, if we click on it, is very useful. Please feel free to read through this. But I will cover the basic queries so that you have a rough understanding of how you can play around with the data. A query is simply a stringified object that we send with a POST request, and we need to send our header with the API key. Now, I'm not going to reveal my API key, but this is the header, and we need to send this API key with it. You can also find your API key in the Settings tab over here. Now before we construct our own query, let's click on this View Examples button. This platform is nice enough to give us some example queries, and the one we want to look at is fetching a wallet's tokens. Let's click on this, and the query will be constructed over here. Queries can sometimes also contain arguments, which we can give it in this Variable tab, like so. In this case, we can see that we need an ENS name, and this is what we provide with the query. Before we further explore the query, let's just run it. So we can click on this button and it will execute the query on this ENS name. And this is the data that we get back. Looking at the data, we can see a correlation from the query to the data. Here we can see we got some wallet data back. And that's because we said we want the wallet. And we need the tokens of this wallet. And here it is. Then we said we need the edges, and we got them. The nodes, we got them. The token ID of that node, the contract of this node, and I think you get the whole concept. Basically, this query structure is being given back to us in the form of the real data. So this is a great example of how the query works. Now let's go ahead and build out a custom query. I'm going to close this, and let's also remove everything inside of here. Now we can see nothing is highlighted. I'm going to just go back and show you that we get queries and mutations. Mutations is to change or update some data, which we don't want to do right now. We want to use a query. So let's select the queries. And here are some of the different queries that we can now target at the top level. For us, we would like to add the wallet. So let's go and click on this plus icon. We can now see that the wallet is there and it's going to return a wallet but with nothing in it. So we get to specify more fields. We get the argument section and the field section. The fields will be returned, but based on what arguments we want to send. I'm going to add the address instead of the ENS name. Now we can see we have an argument to our wallet and we need to pass it in our variable. The next thing that we need to specify is to add the fields that we need returned. Now we can add all of them, but all we are interested in are the tokens. So I'm going to add the tokens. Now we get to specify the fields for the tokens. We get edges and page info. Page info is useful for pagination, which we'll get to just now, but let's just add the edges. Okay, now that we have the edges, we need to add a node because this is the type of token. Now we can specify the fields of the token that we need. I would like to see the token ID. Maybe the symbol would be cool as well. The name, as well as the images. And for the images, just the URL. Now for the variables, let's provide an address. I'm going to submit this address and click on this action button. Then we should see a response, and here we get them. The token ID, the symbol, the name, and an array of images. We get an array of images instead of one because each one of these elements in the array is a better quality of the exact same image. We'll most probably use the best quality of this, which is the last element in the array. Now we can call this query from literally anywhere, and I can prove this by clicking on these three dots and simply doing a curl request from my terminal. So in my terminal, I'm going to paste this request and then hit enter. This will go out and do the request, and here is all of our data. Before we move on, I would like to add at least the functionality to do pagination, because wallets could hold up to thousands of NFTs. So let's go back here, and once more, let's go actually to the level of the edges. Before that, tokens, here we go. Let's go ahead and add the page info. And I'm going to simply add these fields as well. This time, when I make the request, I can also get back here at the bottom this page info. And we can say, does it have a previous page? No. Does it have a next page? Yes. And then we could use this cursor to call the next page. Now, how pagination will work is explained in the documentation. So if you go over here and you go to pagination, you can see that we need to add this, and then we get page info. And then when we specify the contract, we need this after field because this takes a cursor, and in particular, it takes the end cursor. So let's go and add that. To do so, we need the end cursor in our arguments. So we can go back, and here we can see after, but let's also add first for maybe optionally pulling in only 20 or 10 or a different number of NFTs per page. So I'm going to add that as well. Now we can see the variables, and for the first we can enter 10, and then for after, if we want to see the next page, we can take this end cursor and place it in here. Then we do the call, and we should get the next page. And that's essentially how it works. Something cool that I want to show you is that if you go to the documentation, and if you go down to the Developer API, click on Access, here we can see the endpoint to the GraphQL as well as a playground. We can use this playground to call queries publicly without using the API key. But this is just for testing. But to give you an example, here we can go ahead and copy our operation, go over to the playground, paste it in, and then we need our variables. So let's go ahead and copy them, go back to the playground and add them in here. Then hit play. Here is our data. Now this is essentially the same tool as we have here, but maybe this is a good testing ground if you want to test some queries. Now let's go and build out our simple gallery using Next.js. For the implementation, we'll go quite quickly because I want to show you how to consume the data using a Next.js application. You can choose whatever platform you want to use. To follow along, make sure you have Node.js installed on your machine and an IDE. I'm using Visual Studio Code. Then go ahead and open a terminal. I'm going to actually cd to my desktop first, and then I'll run this command: npx create next app at latest. The Next.js CLI will now ask us a bunch of questions, like the project name. I'm going to call this my gallery and hit enter. Then, would you like to use TypeScript? Yes. And then ESLint? Yes. And yes. And I'm just going to hit enter for the rest of everything. Now it's going to install the base application. Now when the CLI is done, you will see your folder over here on your desktop. Okay, so now let's go ahead and open this in Visual Studio Code. I'm going to click on Open, go to my desktop, and find the Gallery app. Hit Open, and here it is. The first thing that we'll do is test if the application will run. So go here to the top, click on Terminal, and New Terminal. The terminal is pointing to the root directory of our Gallery app. That means that we can run npm run dev. When we hit enter, this will spin up the dev server, and we can see there is our app. Holding command and clicking on this link, or going to the localhost port 3000, here we can see the base Next.js application. We can also see by going to the source directory, pages and index, we should find this page. So source, pages, and then index, here it is. Let's clean some of this stuff out. Let's start by removing everything here in the main section. So I'm going to remove that and all the way down to where it says main. Here we go. Then I will put in a p tag just to type in hello, like so. Going to remove this image, and I see we have this font, so maybe we can use this in our p tag. So let's just say class name is now going to be equal to inter.className. And now let's go ahead and check our application. Here we go. It's quite empty with the word hello. Back in the code, for the title, we might need to change this to my gallery. Maybe that's a good name. We can copy this for the description as well, just for time being. Then let's go ahead and consume some of that lovely data from the queries. In order to do that, I'm going to add a function here at the bottom. This function, getServerSideProps, is a Next.js convention. This function will run before we render the pages, and we can get some data and pass props to our function. Now, how I want the gallery to work is that in the URL, I want us to be able to specify a query param, and this one would be the address, like so, and then we'll paste a wallet address in here. So essentially, this is how it will look. Then I want the application to run our queries and to get back the NFTs of this wallet, displaying them nicely over here. Okay, so the first thing for us to do is to try and get this query param from our URL. How can we do this in the getServerSideProps? Well, what we can simply do is have a context in here. And this context, because we're using TypeScript, I'm just going to make as any. Then let's go ahead and in a new variable, write address is going to be equal to our context.query. And now we get to specify what query parameter we want, and that is address. So technically, if we log this out, we should see the address down here. Perfect. So now our application can know whenever we refresh that we have the user's wallet in this query param. Now it is time for us to construct our GraphQL query. Now I'm going to add this variable in here, and essentially this is a variable that is going to JSON stringify this object. The object is going to have my query and my variables. So in order for me to get my query, I'm going to go back to this platform and simply go ahead and copy the operation. Then I'm going to go back and paste it in here. For my variables, we can go back as well and get this object's details. So I'm going to copy this, go back and paste them in here. Now we need the address, the after, as well as the first. For now, I'm not going to provide an after. Maybe I'll leave this as null. And for the address, because we are extracting the address from the URL query, I'm going to replace this in here, like so. Next, we will perform a fetch request to get the data. So the fetch request will look like this. I'm pasting this in here because I don't want to type everything out, and instead I want to make sure you understand the concept. This is a constant value with the rest, the response. We await the fetch request to the GraphQL endpoint of Icy.Tools. This method is a post method, and for the body, we are sending this variable. Then, if we go down, we are passing headers. Now we need to pass the API key, but it's not in here yet because I want to show you how we're going to secure it a little bit better. And we have the content type. Now that we have the response, we will be able to extract the data like so. We can say const data is going to be equal to await the response up here. Then we should be able to console.log our data. But before we do this, let's go ahead and get our API key and secure it with the environment variables. This can be done by creating a new file. This file is called .env.local. Now, the .env.local file is supported by Next.js, and here I'm going to simply type the API underscore key, and then we're going to give it a value. We can find the API key by going to the Settings tab, and here it is. Now I'm simply going to copy this and move over to my env file and paste it. Save the file and let me close it. Now, in order to use this in our code, we can simply type process.env, and then we need the API underscore key. Like so. Now we can see that the header is complaining because with TypeScript, we need to know that this value is always going to be there. So essentially, I'm just going to say that if it is there, use it. If it's not, just make it empty. And now you might have noticed that the data is already being logged out at the bottom. If we go ahead and go to the application and we refresh and go back, we see the data over there because we are logging it out. Perfect, this is working. The last thing for us to do is to actually return it. I want to actually return the address as well as my data because I want to use both fields in my UI. Great, so let's turn our attention to our UI. Here in the home component, I'm just going to pass props and use any. I know this is not the best convention, but for now this is fine. And let's replace the hello with actually the props data. We're going to say this is going to be our props data.address. Perfect. And then let me render something as well. Let me actually just add a line break. And then we're going to map over the data and just maybe render the names. To do so, we need to map over the edges. So how do we get there? Well, we have our props.data. So let's add that. And the data actually coincidentally has another data field, which I can actually remove, but for now, this is okay. In there, we have a wallet, then we have tokens, and then we have edges. So this is very long, but we can say this.map. Then we can simply say the item needs to return something, right? So we need to return something. For now, I'm just going to return a p tag with some data in it. Let's just give it a placeholder. And now we can extract some data from this item. Before we extract some data, what I am going to do is I'm going to copy this, go down, and then instead of just returning the data, I'm going to return data.data, and we're going to return the edges. Because essentially, we don't want this long string, so we can get rid of it. Perfect. This looks way better. By the way, I'm just referencing the data that's given back to us, and that's how I got to the data wallet token and edges. Now we have a node which has a token ID, contract with symbol and name, and images. Okay, so for this step, what we can now do is actually utilize it in here. Let's say that we want the item.node.token ID. Beautiful. And for this, I'm just going to say any. And now when we save the application and refresh, we can see our wallet's address and actually the data coming back, the first 10 NFTs in this wallet. How wonderful is that? Let's see what will happen if we don't add an address. There is an error, of course, so we need to handle some errors as well. But for now, that's not important. What is important is that you can see that we can easily consume this data. Let's just add the image and the name. And in order to do that, instead of simply returning a p tag, let's get rid of this and replace it like so. We are going to return a div with an image, and we are going to get the image index3 URL. Give it a size, and we're also going to get the token ID as well as the name. Let's save this and go back, and here it is. We can see most of the data. Now to make it look a bit more decent, what we can do is wrap this in a div with a style display flex, flex wrap, and a gap of 20 pixels. Let's just close the div down here as well and save it. And then when we go back to our application, we can see we have a nice little gallery. Now, there is something wrong here. I don't get all the images first of all, and secondly, I don't see all of the names of the other NFTs. So let me go ahead and check out what could be wrong. To debug this, what will help us is if we add another p tag, but instead of just logging out the name, let's log out the whole node and wrap this in a JSON.stringify, like so. When we save it and go back, we see all the data on this token, right? So we can see that indeed we have a token ID, but symbol and name is there, but symbol is null. And here we get name is null. Here we get null, null, null with no images as well. And here we get the data again. So our front-end logic isn't wrong, but maybe we need to alter our query. So after looking at the query, I made some changes, and this is the new query. It looks very similar to before, and everything else is the same. So let's run it. And now we can see that we get all the data back. Here we go. There's all the data, the symbol, the name, symbol, name. And we still have a tiny bit of an issue with some of these tokens. So we can see that we get a symbol, we get a name, but we don't get the images. Now, I don't know if this is to do with caching, and there might be a way to update this, but for the most part, if we go back now, we can remove this. Here for the name, we need to add contract, and if we save it, we go back, we can see the data, the ID, image, and name. So let's go ahead and see if our application is working. Let's swap out the address for another address and hit enter. And wow, just like that, we get these beautiful apes in our gallery. I've done some research and I saw that Icy.Tools does indeed cache the images, and that is wonderful because it means that we get these super fast speeds when we load the NFTs. However, if you want the image to definitely show up, but it might be a bit slower, there is a solution. You can always go to the query and go and add the metadata itself. as well as the image. This will be the IPFS link or the decentral storage link to this NFT. You can always render it like that too. Or you can simply wait until the cache has picked it up as well. Now, regardless of how you do your implementation regarding pagination and all sorts of wonderful things, this is all possible with the Icy.Tools GraphQL, and now you have seen how powerful it is. I really hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, drop a like and tell me in the comment section what you enjoyed the most. Remember to subscribe for more content like this, and as always, have a fantastic day.